This episode of Brief.IL is going to be slightly different. Instead of moving from one front to another as we usually do, this episode is going to be centered around one main event, the Munich Security Conference, the Davos of defense, if you will. Every February since 1963, the world's most important politicians, leaders, and generals have assembled in Germany with the one main goal in mind: preventing a third world war. This year's theme, Under Distraction, sought to explore if the world order as we know it has quite literally been broken. The current world order is constantly challenged by Euro-American relations, Iran nuclear, ballistic, and proxy programs, the Sunni alliance strengthening by the day, the Russia-Ukraine war, and of course, the war between Israel and Hamas. All these topics were discussed in the conference and are also going to be the topic of our conversation today. Hello everyone, this is Brief.IL by INSS, a weekly dive into the events shaping Israel's national security. My name is Ofir Dayan and I'm a researcher here at the INSS focusing on anti-Semitism and delegitimization. And here with me in the studio is Reserve Major General Tamir Hayman, former Chief of IDF Military Intelligence, who today is the Executive Director of the INSS, the Institute for National Security Study. Tamir just returns from the Munich Security Conference and is here to brief us about the most pressing issues that were raised there. This is Brief.IL, let's begin. Hello, Tamir.
Hi, Phil.
So you just came back from the Munich Security Conference, and I think one of the most memorable speeches from that conference was that of Secretary of State, the American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that for some seemed a bit different from the speech that Vice President Vance gave last year. It was more forthcoming towards Europe. How did the Europeans and the other members in the conference respond to that speech by Rubio?
You're absolutely right, Ofir. Everybody there in the conference remember last year's event when Vice President Vance preached European about democracy, values, and practically divorced Europe. And everybody is pretty much aware of the fact that President Trump doesn't really like Europeans at all. And the Greenland and whatever happens about the Greenland issue and the Davos speech, and suddenly came Rubio, who didn't really fundamentally change the strategy or didn't really change a single inch from President Trump's vision, but he was more forthcoming. He was more pleasant to European, dealing about the common values and the price we paid in history over defending our liberal democracy values, the fact that everybody is European basically, you Americans are basically European. And that sentiment echoed on. All through the summit, I sense a totally different sentiment from European leaders when discussing about Trump. There was no criticism. Even more, few flattered President Trump for leadership. I think Zelensky was the headed that approach when he constantly thanks Europeans for supporting in the war, but moreover thanking the leadership of Trump and strong backing of Ukraine, etc., etc. Well, I think it was intended to do that effect, and it is important because when dealing with national security, when Europe is obsessed about Russia and knowing that they will need to ramp up their military presence, the cruciality and the fact that they cannot endure without United States was present in the summit all through. And I think Secretary Rubio did a very, very smart thing when laying the foundation of that sentiment that echoed on.
So I'm going to use your terms. You said that Vice President Vance divorced Europe, so Rubio remarried Europe in a sense. But like any marriage, not without problems, he was very, very clear about things that Europe has to change. He said that we don't live in a perfect world and diplomacy doesn't solve everything, and so they need to increase their military budgets and they they need to be more just offensive and not just defensive. How do you see the European policy changing, if at all, in response to that speech and to Trump's requests?
Well, Europe is considering the independency needed to all sovereign countries to be able to defend themselves. They are aware of the fact that they have prematured, stripped themselves and too fast from military might, and they cannot depend on any issue of security on NATO and Chapter 5. There are frictions in the border, or there are potential threats that NATO will not intervene, and America is not going to be there to help them. And although maybe it's not crucial events, but they need to create some new forms of security concept defense measures. First of all, military, and Europe is increasing the investment and defense tech in procurement, reaching to 5% of the GDP in military is going to create the largest ever military powers in the history of the world. Right now, Ukraine has a huge army, the largest army in Europe. And imagine 5% out of the German and French GDP invested in military.
And some historical connotations as well.
For all Jews, I think, in the historical context, that really brings up some form of not that pleasant ideas and thinking. But that's the world we are entering. So what are Europeans doing? They know that they cannot be fully independent without NATO and without Americans, but I see joint interest groups formulating about the 5 or 4 fronts of Europe. The Eastern Front, in front of Russia, that's one unique, mostly Eastern Europe countries. The southern flank, which consists of terror and immigration, which consists on the more Mediterranean countries of Europe, Greece, Spain, Italy. The northern front, the new evolving Arctic arena because of climate change. There are new routes. Everything is changing in the Arctic arena. That's the northern front, and also the Western Front. Not against United States, but hedging, bordering, and ensuring that they will not be fully dependent on each specific issue on United States.
So I'm sure that it's unpleasant for many European leaders to see themselves not capable of responding to threats without the assistance of the United States. And at least economically, here comes a new initiative that I think we're first hearing about in the Munich Security Conference from the Indian foreign minister, who says, okay, China and the United States are fighting and we shouldn't be suffering from this. So all the big economies, setting aside the United States and China, we should cooperate together without them. What is he trying to achieve? And I'm just going to say it as a sideline. Trump has already been punishing India for other things. I'm pretty sure the Trump administration is not going to be happy with this proposal.
The idea of, he called it the G-2, that is to connect somehow the global south and emerging economies in the Indo-Pacific without China and United States. Let them make their own trade wars with each other. We can endure, we can create something unique if you connect Europe economies with the global south and mainly India, not divorcing from China and United States, but creating an alternative. China considered itself as the new largest market in the world. They will reach $2 trillion of market. That is amazingly large. And they need markets. They need to lead the world. They want a leading role, which in the broader Indo-Pacific region, China is the leader. So by creating a new way of thinking of global economies, next arena of global economies, that the G-2, they are creating for themselves, basically, for India, the way to increase their capability. And that's also related to the corridor that connects Europe with India through the Middle East, what is called the IMAC initiative, which we led this side event in the institute, the INSS led a side event in the Munich summit, and maybe we'll talk a few words about that at the end of this chapter.
Yeah. Now getting closer to our own neighborhood, and you mentioned earlier that the Europeans are obsessed with Russia, and that even influences how they view Iran. So Iran was treated unfavorably at this conference. I'm sure many are not going to be surprised when they find out it's not about the protesters and killing of protesters. It's more about Iranian support for Russia. So before we get to the responses to that support, why is Iran even supporting Russia? What does it get out of Russia, and what does it give to Russia?
I think that Iran made the huge historical mistake by supporting Russia. They've saved Russia in one of the most fragile moments in the war against Ukraine, when Russia didn't have those unique UAV capabilities, because Russia historically were more invested in large platforms, jet planes and tanks and artillery, not small hovering devices like UAVs. And Iran pretty much gave up on all of those platforms and constantly insisted and invested in UAVs. And that created something of a match made in heaven. They provided the UAVs to Russia in a crucial moment, which created huge destructive capabilities of Ukraine and created damage unprecedented because of the UAV, especially the Shahed drones. And they hope that Russia will somehow provide them what's missing for them. Jet planes, tanks.
Did it?
Nothing. They just promised. Russians like Russians. They get what they need. They don't owe to anyone what they don't really, what is against their interest. And by aligning with Europe, with Russia, European leaders are considering this regime, the Iranian regime, as the worst of its kind. And I've heard constantly across the board, amazing, among European leaders who are more on the dovish side of military concepts, speaking very aggressively about Iran and demanding the Iranian regime to be toppled, and knowing that that's the end state, whatever is needed. That is amazing. It's the second consensus I'm hearing about that. I've heard it also in conferences in the United States. It seems like, apart from few Eastern country, by the way, is India. India is a large supporter and a great cooperator with Iran, because they consider Iran as stabilizing the issues of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that's for they are pretty much supporting Iran. Except from that is really unprecedented negative approach as a consensus by European leader against Iran.
So it's good for us in the end of the day, but how far are Europeans willing to go in pressuring Iran to halt its support for Russia? Obviously, for us, it would serve another purpose, to weaken Iran and its fight against Israel. We all know the Shahed UAVs that you described. It sent us all to shelters for a nice amount of time last year. So how far are Europeans willing to go?
Not that far, not to a military deployment or not to a military operation directly against Iran, but they will back United States, and that is important. If United States is going to enter a war against Iran in the near future, they need the international legitimacy and they need the domestic legitimacy. That is what Trump is trying to achieve right now. And in that case, the European backing of a military operation by United States in Iran is something not taken for granted, and that seems to be the case right now. As for sanctions, they will support and back Trump maximum power campaign and the sanctions. And more important, even if the sanctions will be lifted in some form of Iranian next deal.
And important to mention, we're recording on Tuesday, and today Iran and the United States are meeting for another round of negotiations.
Exactly. Not that guaranteed that Europe firms will make business with Iran again, like in the previous round. During the JCPOA, lots of European firms, manufacturing of car, manufacturing of other goods, materials, metals, moved to Iran to exploit this human potential and the resources of Iran. And I'm not sure that will be the case, even if there will be a deal.
So, and besides Iran, there's another big focal point here in the Middle East, which was very prominent in the Munich conference, which is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, alongside Turkey and Qatar, but mostly Saudi Arabia, expressed displeasure with Israel. What were the topics? What was raised, and how? And what we can say about this Qatari, Turkish, and Saudi reproachment or aligning in terms of Israel?
Well, it's a process in its early evolvement. It's not done there yet. The threat of let's call it Saudi and Islamic Brotherhood cooperating together is a threat that will create that kind of an axis between Saudi, Qatar, Turkey, maybe Ashar regime in Syria. That's not yet there. It's not the system. It's evolving threat. But what was very much prominent or obvious in the conference was the difference. The different approach of Saudi to regional element. It seems like the confrontation between Saudi and the UAE is spreading all across the region and really influences Israel as well. We are seeing arguments regarding the involvement in Sudan, where there's a direct blame of UAE supporting the Rapid Support Force and a clear demand to punish UAE for that reason. And it was really much dominant or in the conference. Secondly, accusing UAE of cooperating with Israel against the Arab interest in the Gulf states, which is really amazing. UAE helped Saudi establish hegemony over the Arab Peninsula, and now they are being blamed of betraying them. And third,
and they were on the same side in the war in Yemen, for example.
Yeah, and third, growing sentiment by Saudi's representative that claim that Israel is trying to achieve hegemony in the Middle East on the expense of other countries. You can imagine what country they are referring to. And third and last, that Israel is obsessed of its internal, its security, and will do whatever it needs in order to ensure its security on the expense of the security and stabilization of the region. According to the Saudis, Israel is destabilizing state, trying to break them into pieces in order to ensure its internal and own security on the expense of the Arabs. So that all of those issues by the Saudis were very blunt, very different than the general approach I've seen last year, which was very positive. 3 years ago, we were on a brink of normalization with Saudi Arabia. It's all a matter of few details to close. It seems like now we are much far away from expanding Abraham Accords and reaching this capstone of the Muslim world, which is Saudi.
So I think, our listeners Israelis, of course, really hope that Israel would do whatever it takes to guarantee our security. What are some things that Israel is doing that for Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey are beyond the line of legitimacy?
First of all, about Syria. They are claiming that we are deliberately diminishing the power and authority of Bashar regime and Israel is trying to do its best in order to create another round of civil war in Syria to ensure that Syria will not be a centralized dominant state by Ashara. Secondly, it seems like the work we are doing in Gaza and in Lebanon right now is criticized as being disruptive, not following and increasing the visions of President Trump and what Saudi is trying to back. And the very, very unique behind the scene security cooperation between UAE and Israel, which is very extensive and very deep, is considered by Saudi as an emerging threat. And of course, what we have done in Somaliland, the fact that we acknowledge Somaliland as an independent state, creates some threat over the Red Sea. Saudi consider the Red Sea as their backyard. They will not want any foreign involvement in their backyard. They will allow Turkey, as long as they control it, and Turkey has presence in the Red Sea. And the fight over the Red Sea between Israel, so-called, and Saudi and UAE, because both UAE and Israel supports Somaliland, and Saudi backs the government in Somalia. That all of those elements creates this friction.
It's very interesting. We see a new Middle East, not the way Shimon Peres imagined it, but a new Middle East with an axis between Israel and the UAE, and then Saudi Arabia and Turkey on another side. But I assume that another thing, and you briefly mentioned it, that Saudi Arabia is not happy with, is the Palestinian issue. And while Saudi Arabia wanted to punish the UAE, the Palestinians came to this conference, to the Munich conference, asking European countries to punish Israel and to sanction Israel. What were their claims, and how did the Europeans respond to that request?
Well, it was very clear that there is an organized campaign by Palestinian former leaders and scholars that was very, very coherent on all the events I attended when that group of Palestinians was moving around from one event to another, and they claimed once and again the fact that Europe, most European countries, acknowledged the Palestinian state as a state. They recognize the Palestinian state. And for that, they need to follow on in their statements and acknowledge the fact that this Palestinian state is being right now run over by Israelis. So it's against the statement. Secondly, those Palestinian leaders are trying to exploit the rift, the gap between Europe and United States, and wants to create an independent foreign policy by European countries and the EU to sanction Israel, apart from United States. They are keep on claiming, stop with the talking and start with the action, and punish Israel for what they are doing in the West Bank, in Gaza, whatever they are claiming that we are doing, practically annexing territories in the West Bank. That is after the new registration law about land acquisition in the West Bank, which was passed in the Israeli cabinet and government. That was very coherent, blunt demand approaching European leaders. How do Europe respond? As European generally responds, they understood. They were very empathetic to this claim, but practically I'm tending to conclude that they will do nothing because they cannot do anything without the Americans, especially right now, and crossing fire with President Trump and obstructing what he's trying to achieve in Gaza and the board of peace for the sake of sanctioning Israel right now is not. It's a step too far to American. But the bad news was it's very coherent. And it is accepted by European leaders. And that's bad news for Israel.
So we start with accepting the principle and then is followed a few years later by accepting the demands that the Palestinians make. And I have to say, on a personal note, I think that this is one of the biggest flaws that Israel has, because the Palestinians always have a coherent message and they all rely it, while Israel has a confused message that is not relied by everyone. But I want to conclude with something you mentioned.
I want to add something unique that I've heard once more than once in the conference regarding Palestinian vision of a state, of a solution. It was not anecdotal. It's something that they've repeatedly. So it's probably somehow coordinated. They say that, well, there's not a chance of a two-state solution. According to Israeli government, they will never approve two-state solution. So what's the solution? We should wait 20 years maybe. Eventually, because of demography, Israel will be considered by most European countries as an apartheid state. It will not be a democratic state. It will be a Jewish state, but an apartheid state. So 20 years from now, when all of the European countries and maybe United States will acknowledge that or will face this reality of an apartheid state 20 years from now, it will be a second time of what happened in South Africa. There will be action against Israel. Israelis could not travel, will not be able to travel across the world, and eventually that will lead to the Palestinians taking over the state of Israel as a one state and a Palestinian one. That clear vision that was repeatedly once and again was something important to notice, and maybe something that we should conclude from that. Not a two-state solution, but wait a while, 20 years from now, history will make its way, and eventually the international community and the world will force Israel to transfer its sovereignty into the Palestinians.
Okay, so we'll conclude with a topic that you mentioned earlier, the Board of Peace. It seems like there's some sort of a confusion, because Europeans seems to be very happy with the end goal, but not very happy with the way that we're taking to get there and with the rhetoric. What can you tell us about this and how they're likely to respond to this Board of Peace that in some way is replacing the UN, at least in aspiration?
Well, let's start from how Palestinians look at the Board of Peace. They keep on repeating what do you can expect from a Board of Peace when the president is Trump and Netanyahu is a part of the Board of Peace, and both of them reject the Palestinian state. So in their point of view, there's no chance that this Board of Peace will lead to a credible, sovereign Palestinian state. That's their claim. Secondly, European countries are criticizing the fact that the Board of Peace has a vague kind of... nobody really knows what will it replace the UN, and what are the true authorities, and what's the future. I even heard something very unique that according to the basic statement of the Board of Peace, President Trump can lead the Board of Peace even after the end of his tenure. He can lead the Board of Peace indefinitely. So it's not a democratic international board. So they are criticizing that, European, I say. But then,
because Trump is signed as Trump and not as president of the United States,
and it seems like it's like a business platform of a chairman that really doesn't really relate to the fact that the chairman is Donald Trump, but not related to his presidency as the United States President of America. Secondly, although that is very, very troubling, the response by members of the Board of Peace and the Executive Board of Gaza, who were representing their interests, said, and they received large approval in that aspect. That's the best we can do right now, and give it a chance. We are giving some form of a new vision. We are we are insist on demilitarizing Hamas. We're going to rebuild Gaza as a flourishing, prosperous a place, and we are eventually wants to continue to a Palestinian state. Eventually, as a vision, it is written in the 20 points plan. So give us a chance. And that was a kind of confusing elements, confusing two trends that collided when they approached the idea of New Gaza, the idea of Board of Peace. Very interesting.
So before we finish, I have to ask you one more question about the Board of Peace, because I really think it's interesting. We discussed earlier Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey and how they view Israel. Do they differ in their view of the Board of Peace from the European perspective that you just described?
Yeah, they are fully supportive of the Board of Peace. According to them, it will be successful because they know how to deal with Hamas, and they are insisting that the vision of Trump is a good vision. They keep on referring as that as a positive thing. Board of Peace is on a verge, or all of the structure on a verge of a huge test, which is, when will the Technocratic Committee of Gaza, the NCAG, the government of Gaza, will enter? Will they able to deploy Palestinian force enforcement in the red zone, combined with Palestinian policemen, which is not really there yet? And will Hamas agree to voluntarily disarm? Those are the three crucial tests, three crucial exams that we're going to be witnessing in the next few days or weeks.
So for anyone interested, we discussed this issue in one of our previous episodes, and Qatar and Turkey's interest in demilitarizing Hamas or not demilitarizing Hamas. And we will end with the bonus question that I had in mind, because I do think it's interesting for our listeners and viewers to know that the INSS hosted a panel at the Munich conference on the IMAC, and the INSS also established a research group here in the INSS on IMAC led by Galia Lavi. So what can you tell us about this panel that we led? And maybe the interesting topics that were raised there?
Well, IMAC, the India, Middle Eastern, European Economic Corridor, that is the IMAC, is crucial because it's planned to pass through to Europe through the port of Haifa and through Israel. And that is crucial. It will practically connect Israel with a network of infrastructure to the Middle East and to the new rising force of the Indo-Pacific, which is India. That will ensure that Israel is a prominent player in the new regional economy architect of the Middle East, and will ensure that facing a new world order, the Middle East can tackle most of the challenging threats that we are facing, from climate change to political unrest in the era. And because of the importance of four major key players, I think it's crucial for Israel to lead it. Southern European countries, Greece, Cyprus, and maybe Italy, very supportive generally on Israel, all of those three. India and UAE, because from India it enters the Middle East through UAE port, and UAE and Israel. Well, we have problem in the middle, Saudi Arabia, and if Saudi will not cooperate, it will break. It will not happen.
That's in an American initiative, so.
But the Americans can force them in to do that, and we can also explain how, if you want to rebuild Gaza and connect Gaza, create a port in Gaza, or explore the gas fields in Gaza, you can connect Gaza also through Israel and to this corridor. And that's create a new Middle Eastern call, and it's really related to President Trump's vision of the region. So I think it's a win-win situation, and we need to promote it. And that we tried. We tried not just to talk about trades and roads and trucks or trains, but also to discuss the digital sovereignty or the digital aspect of data and advanced information network that will be spread all of the Middle East, and of course electricity and power generation capability, and all of that aspect. It seems like it's a win-win. We have in the Middle East enough energy, we have enough brain power. We need just the infrastructure that will lead us to the next era of digital transformation that we are facing.
So on that positive note, we'll end here. Thank you, Tamir, for briefing us on the Munich Security Conference.
Thank you, Ofir.
And thank you all for joining us on Brief.IL. You're invited to join us every week and follow us on our INSS website and everywhere you listen to your podcasts. Every week we will bring to you the most pressing issues influencing Israel's national security. And I want to thank our incredible podcast team, Ariel Nugrian, Shai Shachaf, and Omer Vixelbaum. See you next week.